You're listening to a Roddenberry Podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. We'll have more news this evening, but first...
The latest Gene-ology, a Roddenberry Podcast.
Episode 75, The Pickup. Welcome to Mission Log Gene-ology. I'm Ashley Thomas.
And I'm Earl Green. Each week on Gene-ology, we dig through the truckload of scripts and shows in the Roddenberry archive, looking through Gene Roddenberry's early TV writing work, or any signs of the morals, meanings, or messages that were part of his most famous work, Star Trek.
There might be just a few signs of that this week.
No, those were speed limit signs that we drove past really fast. Pedal to the metal much?
Whoops. Now, before we get to trivia on this week's episode, let me please take a brief moment to encourage you to join our Patreon, or follow us on YouTube, or leave a review wherever you're listening to us, or hey, why not go for the hat trick? Get them all of the above.
Speaking of hat tricks, Patreon is your gateway to all things Mission Log, including exclusive access to the unedited version of our show and our private Discord where you can interact with us, your hosts, during scheduled live chats, which are, kind of like the unedited version of our show, except we actually hear you when you shout at us. And I've got to tell you, there is nothing quite like Gene-ology After Dark chats, which brings us back to the hats.
Yeah, there was one night we show up and we're wearing snazzy hats and everybody's like, oh, is it hat night? And literally everyone goes to get a hat except for Shar, who got a stola. Which, why not?
Close enough.
Why not?
Yeah, words can't describe. I mean, we're trying to use words, but really it's best described with hats, which literally came right after we recorded the previous week's episode of Shannon. Where our bad guys were zooming around in schnazzy hats. Like, okay, that's the bad guy look? Okay. Mm-hmm. Anyway, you can access all of this, hats and occasional cats and all, for just $1 a month. I'm not going to kick you out of bed if you want to pitch a little more in. Mm-hmm. Head over to patreon.com/missionlog to see what tier works for you and join the conversation.
By the way, folks, reviews really help our show way more than you could possibly imagine. Even if you can't come up with the words for a written review, a 5-star rating goes a long way to tell the algorithm that you like us, you love us, you want some more of us, you think other people might like and love us too. We are counting on our loyal genealogists to help us spread the word and join in the fun. And now, this week's trivia. Earl, have you picked up some trivia for us this week?
Oh, there's a lot of trivia to pick up, so it's time to switch to the trivia hat. While last week we discussed the life and career of Shannon's star, George Nader, who headlined all 36 episodes of the show's run, this time around we are putting the only other frequent recurring actor in the spotlight, Regis Toomey. Born in 1898, Regis is yet another performer who discovered a love for acting very early, and he had a promising Broadway career underway in the 1920s. He was a rising star of the musical stage throughout that decade until he was sidelined by chronic laryngitis, putting his singing career on hold. He quickly shifted to movie roles that didn't require him to sing, and within a decade Regis had landed comfortably in the category of very reliable character actors, frequently playing hard-nosed cops and detectives. He stayed pretty busy. Regis appeared in nearly half of Shannon's episodes as Bill Cochran, who would dispatch Joe Shannon on his insurance investigation cases that often turned out to be disproportionately dangerous. Cochran was mentioned in more episodes than he was actually seen in, since Shannon was often dictating his case notes addressed to his boss. Fear not, greener pastures were still ahead for Regis Toomey, who scored a frequent recurring role in Burke's Law in the 1963-64 season, a part he played in 64 episodes over the show's 3-season run through 1966. All the while, Regis was busy on the big screen as well. Mighty Joe Young, Guys and Dolls, The Big Sleep, and both the movie and TV versions of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Regis Toomey died in 1991, 12 days before Gene Roddenberry passed. But as far as guest stars, we have got some solid Star Trek connections here. Welcome back DeForest Kelley as Carlisle. Dee and Gene were already old acquaintances, having worked together first in an episode of Boots and Saddles, after which Gene cast DeForest as the lead in his unsold series pilot 333 Montgomery. As we keep saying, because he keeps popping up, surely DeForest Kelley needs no introduction. Gene finally wrote just the right role for him as Dr. Leonard McCoy in Star Trek. But wait, there's more. Also guest starring in this episode as Marie is Kathy Brown, who Star Trek fans will remember as Deela, the leader of the super sped-up aliens in the third season episode Wink of an Eye in 1968. An episode in which, by the way, she spurned the attention of one of her cohorts in favor of wooing Captain Kirk, which is how we wound up with an action scene that is part fist fight, part pillow fight between William Shatner and Jason Evers, who played Pitcairn in Wrangler. But even before we get to Star Trek, Gene will work with Kathy Brown again, because of Gene's final 5 episodes of Have Gun Will Travel that we have yet to cover. Kathy guest stars in 2 of them, playing a different role each time. And she will also return for a later episode of Shannon, again playing a different role. A year prior to her Star Trek role, Kathy landed her only series regular gig as Angie in the Western series Hondo. We lost Kathy Brown in 2003. Shannon was the creation of writer John Hawkins, who had gotten in on the ground floor of American scripted TV in the 1940s, and contributed to many shows and many genres. Studio One, Schlitz Playhouse, The Frank Sinatra Show, 77 Sunset Strip, Temple Houston, Rawhide, Burke's Law, and he was a frequent credit on Bonanza and the original TV version of Little House on the Prairie, both shows on which he was also a long-running producer. This was the only series John Hawkins created before we lost him in 1978. The pickup was Gene's second and final effort for the Screen Gems series Shannon, and this time he was the sole writer credited. The episode appears to be lost media, but we do have a script whose cover says it's the final draft, dated April 14th, 1961, a couple of days after Yuri Gagarin became the first human being to orbit the Earth. Be on the lookout for a couple of mentions of the space age.
You're taking this awfully easy. A man who doesn't bluster or beg can be dangerous. I'd guess you're either cop or bonding company agent, right? But that doesn't change anything. I'll guess your move before you ever make it. That's why I've been studying you, like I would a new electronic calculator circuit. You've been fed information, and it's adding up to predictable conclusions.
And I've been studying you too, mister, for weeks. I predicted you pride yourself on using only cold logic. No weighing human factors, ethics, beliefs, love, hate, or so on. Maybe that's your weakness.
Wonderful. Mathematically impossible. Yet here you are, a thinking man driving the very truck I picked. Now, these abstracts you talk about, they're what makes the human mind inefficient. You see, I've gotten rid of them. I don't love, you see. I don't hate. Nothing. I just compute. The name is Carlisle. What's yours?
Shannon.
I ran across this whole concept, Shannon, while I was working on a computer. Suddenly, I realized a machine is really superior to us.
They don't make what you consider errors.
Right. A machine has no emotions. Logically, I know the world is going to nearly destroy itself. Nuclear science makes it possible. The lessons of history make it inevitable. The only way to survive is reason, like a calculator. The first step was money.
Since you're not confused by emotional abstracts, taking these shipments was simply an exercise in logic. An efficient calculator is bound to outguess inefficient ones.
That's why I can outguess you. I can work other humans like marionettes on a string.
You remind me of a college boy, Carlisle. You're so delighted over learning a few simple facts, you put them together all wrong.
You're not as smart as I thought you were.
Joe Shannon, an insurance inspector for the Transport Bonding and Surety Company, takes on the tough cases for his boss, Bill Cochran. Shannon travels to and arrives on the scene in a late-model Buick brimming with gadgets, but his cunning and his instincts are his chief weapons in cracking his toughest cases. Prologue. On a bright desert highway, cool wind in his hair, Shannon is parked by the side of the road, his camera at the ready, watching for something very specific in passing traffic. Something that's 2 hours overdue. A truck carrying a shipment of cutting-edge electronics fully bonded by Shannon's employers. A call on the car phone. That shipment blew through an expected refueling stop without stopping or refueling. Shannon hasn't missed seeing the truck. It's never arrived. Time to turn around and investigate. The problem is, there aren't many turnoffs in the stretch where the truck should have refueled, and where Shannon had the highway traffic staked out. In fact, only one turnoff, leading to the Mexican border. After searching down this detour, Shannon finds the truck, the doors of its now empty trailer hanging wide open. The tracks of smaller vehicles lead across the border, and footprints make it clear the cargo was offloaded to those vehicles. When Shannon opens the cab to see what became of the driver, his expression tells us that what's left of the man isn't a very pretty sight. Act 1. Back at the offices of Transport Bonding and Surety, Shannon's rolling the film his camera took during his investigation of the wayward truck. The audience includes his boss, Cochran, Mr. Drake, the head of the electronics manufacturer who made the stolen cargo, and a representative of the Highway Patrol. We still don't see the film Shannon took of the driver's body, but the reactions of the men watching the film say it all. Tough way to die, says the Highway Patrol captain. Cochran, on the other hand, is worried because he underwrote 100% of the missing shipment. Shannon says, "That's the trouble with you, Cochran. You're all heart." Worse yet, the stolen cargo was rolled onto the decks at Veracruz just before the boat pushed off. That cargo is now on international waters. It's not coming back. The details of a suspect emerge, probably an electronics specialist who knows what to do with the cargo he stole, probably arranged to sell it all before he even had it in hand, and oh yeah, he's a stone-cold killer. Drake is doubtful about having Cochran insure the next truckload of electronics. After all, now that the space race is on, the value of Drake's miniaturized electronics is now literally sky-high. The Highway Patrol captain recommends armed escort. Drake suggests shipping by air instead, but Cochran brings that suggestion in for a rough landing, saying, "Once hijacking starts paying off, we can't afford to bond cargo on highways, water, air, or any other way. In other words, a second shipment by truck will also be a target, but this affords an opportunity to catch the murderous thief." Shannon suggests that the next driver should be able to handle himself in a fight, but also needs to know the routes, the checkpoints, how to communicate with other truckers. And hey, this sounds like a job for Shannon. Coordinating with the Highway Patrol, Shannon starts laying out a system of checkpoints where patrol cars will be waiting to put eyes on him. Looks like Shannon's trading his high-tech car in for a big rig, good buddy. On the road again, Shannon is trucking along and waves to the Highway Patrol car at the first checkpoint, signaling all is well. Just in case, Shannon is armed, a loaded revolver hidden beneath the driver's seat. He's ready for trouble. What he's not ready for is a young lady stepping partway into the path of his truck trying to hitch a ride. He has to swerve to miss her. A convertible behind the truck does stop, picking her up. Spotting this in the rearview mirror, Shannon makes a note of the time this happened. But what of Shannon's car, you asked? What about that late-model Buick with high-tech gadgets packed into every nook and cranny? It's waiting off the side of the highway ahead with Cochran behind the wheel. Spotting Shannon's truck approaching in the distance, Cochran gets out of the car and waits as Shannon puts on the brakes. Cochran is checkpoint Bravo. All is well. The convertible that picked up the lady hitchhiker passes Shannon's stopped truck, and in fact, the hitchhiker in question waves at Shannon, though with how many fingers I couldn't tell you. Time for Shannon to start rolling again. Cochran keeps pace in Shannon's car for a while. That night, Shannon pulls into a truck stop to gas up. Another Highway Patrol car is already here. That's the third checkpoint. While the truck's tank is being topped off, Shannon's going to step inside and empty his tank. The Highway Patrolman keeps an eye on the truck while Shannon's gone. But someone inside the truck stop is keeping an eye on Shannon, one Mr. Carlyle, well-dressed, sharp-eyed, watching from a distance, because someone else there is already waiting for Shannon, namely Cochran. Cochran is second-guessing this whole thing, but Shannon thinks he's on the right track. They're looking for a suspect who's smart enough to get into the cab and stay low and out of sight while keeping a loaded gun pointed at the driver, giving them orders. See you don't let it go that far, Cochran says. I wrote a special policy on you. Yeah, I forgot, Shannon replies. Let's see, this is Thursday. That's the day I collect if I'm hit by a meteorite. Shannon wolfs down a meal and coffee, a lot of coffee, before hitting the road again. Before too long, he'll reach the point where the previous shipment was stolen. But as Shannon slowly pulls the truck out of the truck stop and toward the highway, a man runs up to the truck and jumps onto the back of the cab, hanging on between the cab and the trailer. It's Carlyle, packing a Luger, and as the truck goes through the gears on its way to highway speed, Carlyle plants his feet on the passenger side footboard and forces the door open against the wind. Carlyle and Shannon wrestle for control of the vehicle, and when Shannon reaches under his seat for his own gun, Carlyle knocks it out of his hands. The truck is all over the road. Carlyle gets his hands on Shannon's gun, so the halftime score is now Carlyle 2 guns, Shannon 0. Shannon manages to keep the truck from leaving the road, saving both their skins, but now he's a live hostage. Carlyle rolls the window down and throws Shannon's gun out. Shannon tries everything he can to signal for help, including bumping the load light switch with his knee, killing the lights that mark out the trailer to passing drivers. But Carlyle spots this and coolly says, I think we ought to keep the load lights on. When Shannon doesn't immediately obey, Carlyle points the Luger at him and says, the last trucker didn't cooperate. He drove all the way with a bullet in him. Must have hurt plenty. Shannon tries to put a foot on the brakes, but Carlyle has already spotted it. By now, something should be obvious. I can predict every move you'll make. Carlyle's already talking a lot, so Shannon just asks what the plan is. In 45 minutes, I'm going to kill you, Carlyle says. Next question? And the scary thing is, he's not even ranting or raving. This is the stone-cold killer Shannon predicted. Shannon asks, what's to keep me from taking us both off the next bridge or head on into traffic? Dying is dying. Carlyle smiles unnervingly. Why does a condemned man stand up in front of a firing squad? Why doesn't he fight back? They never do. Let's see if I'm right. You can die now, or live a little while and then die. Take your choice. Yeah, some road trip conversations, am I right? When they spot a highway patrol checkpoint coming up, Carlyle tells Shannon to wave at the officer, or else. Which he does. Carlyle smiles to himself. He's thought of everything. Now you've got 42 minutes. Goes fast, doesn't it? Act 2. Shannon's truck passes another patrol car, and he waves at the officer again, because Carlyle's laying low on the passenger side, pointing a gun at him. 35 minutes to live. How's it feel? Carlyle asks. But Shannon's also being a cool customer, leading Carlyle to guess that he's either a cop or an insurance bonding agent. But it doesn't matter. Carlyle is confident that he knows exactly what Shannon will do. Shannon replies, I've been studying you too, mister, for weeks. I predicted you pride yourself on using only cold logic, no weighting human factors, ethics, beliefs, love, hate, or so on. Maybe that's your weakness. Carlyle breaks into a delighted grin. These abstracts you talk about, they're what make the human mind inefficient. You see, I've gotten rid of them. I don't love. I don't hate. Nothing. I just compute. Carlyle then brags that he hatched his scheme while he was working on a computer, and in that moment he realized that the human mind is inferior to the machine, and he started thinking like a machine instead. Because, Carlyle says, a machine has no emotions. He says he can play every person around him like a puppet. But Shannon says he's heard it all before, usually from self-assured college sophomores who think they'll rule the world. That gets under Carlyle's skin. Turns out he's not so emotionless after all. Shannon points out that Carlyle is losing his cool. Right about that time, they both spot a woman in the road trying to hitch a ride in the dead of night. Wait, is this the same hitchhiker Shannon had to avoid earlier? Carlyle insists that Shannon stop to pick her up. Then he'll have 2 hostages, since Shannon seems not to be too preoccupied with his own survival. Meet Marie. She recognizes Shannon and his truck. She asks Carlisle if he's the co-pilot, to which he just says, no. Right about then, she picks up on the weirdness in what is suddenly a very small space. Now look, she says, I already had to fight off some jerk in a convertible. And then Carlisle pulls his gun out of his pocket again for all to see. If Shannon doesn't do what he says, Carlisle will kill her instead, and it'll be Shannon's fault. When Marie starts to mouth off at Carlisle, Shannon warns her, this man is deadly serious. There's a signpost up ahead. It says 35-mile-per-hour speed zone ahead, traffic law strictly enforced. Shannon floors it and blows right past a cop car. Carlisle, pleased that his new hostage gives him some measure of control over the situation, can't help but gloat. You see, Shannon, I'm manipulating a new circuit now. I'm always probing, learning. It's only after he stops talking that he notices the lights on the police car now chasing Shannon's truck. Local cop, pull over. But when the cop shows up at the door, Carlisle flashes some cash and says he and his partner were just trying to make up some time because... And he glances at Marie. You know, wink, wink. He offers the cop a couple of 20s to pay the ticket for them and has Marie hand over the money. Shannon says, I still have to sign the ticket, won't I? But no, the small-town cop says he can take care of that, too. As the policeman walks away, now $40 richer, Carlisle continues gloating. Nice try, Shannon, but no, you don't get to write a message asking the cop for help or backup. And he keeps going on about it before announcing to Marie that Shannon has 7 minutes to live. But there's another checkpoint up ahead. Cochran has driven out ahead of them in Shannon's car and has pulled off the highway to wait. Shannon brings the truck to a stop. Carlisle has pulled Marie down out of sight, and he's also hiding, keeping his gun on Shannon. Cochran walks up to the driver's side door for a quick face-to-face, and while Shannon says everything's going okay, he scrawls a single word into the dirt on the driver's side door with his finger. Inside. Cochran quietly pulls out a revolver and asks Shannon if he doesn't need to gas up soon. Nah, Shannon says he'll gas up when he really needs to. Cochran tells him, drive carefully, huh? This route's kind of tricky ahead. Shannon replies, yes, there are some curves that make driving difficult. With that, Cochran steps away and Shannon gets the truck moving again. Shannon sees Cochran drive away in his car, though when he's out of sight, Cochran slams on the brakes, does a U-turn, and starts following, calling the highway patrol on the car phone while he's at it. Shannon's window is still open. Hey, you know, idling like that sucked in a lot of engine exhaust. They keep driving, and Marie tries to keep Carlisle talking, trying to convince him she is ready to throw her lot in with him. While Carlisle is distracted, Shannon tries to reach for his door's rearview mirror, but Carlisle spots it and tells Shannon to stop the truck with both hands on the wheel. He then tells Marie to get out and see what Shannon was reaching for. Marie says it's a gun hanging from the rearview mirror. Carlisle tells her to throw it into the bushes by the side of the road and get back in. Shannon looks disappointed as he hears something land in the brush. Then Carlisle points to a dirt road. Hey, there's our turn. Turn off your lights, go down that road, stop, and kill the engine. Moments later, Shannon's car, driven by Cochran, breezes past the turnoff, completely missing it. Carlisle decides he can make the rest of the trip without Shannon. Whatever you boys are going to do it outside. Marie doesn't want to see the mess. Both doors open, but just as an insurance policy, Carlisle brings the butt of his gun down on the back of Shannon's head, literally knocking him out of the truck. Carlisle runs around to meet Shannon and revisits his earlier hypothetical question about firing squads. It's Shannon's turn to find out what he would do in that situation. Shannon knows what he would do. He puts up a last-minute fight, picking up a tree limb and raising it to hit Carlisle with it. A shot rings out. Both men look shocked, but only one of them took a bullet. Because Marie just shot Carlisle in the back with the gun that was left on Shannon's rearview mirror by Cochran. She threw a rock into the brush instead and kept the gun on her person because she knew she'd have to be the one to use it. Act 3. Still at night, police cars now surround the truck, along with Shannon's car. Cochran brought the cavalry only to find the fight was already over. Cochran tells Marie that there will be a police inquest in Yuma, but after that, the company will pay to get her to whatever her destination was. Oh, that's right, Shannon says. You were headed to New York, right? And, we should cover a month's accommodations, $500 in expense money. Cochran starts to protest, but Shannon says, of course, she could sue the company for placing her in jeopardy. Shannon even knows a good lawyer, and with that, the men trade places. Shannon will drive Marie in his own car, and it's Cochrane's turn to drive the big rig the rest of the way to its intended destination. The end.
Well done, Earl. I think you picked up that recap and ran with it. You did a fine job, my friend.
It could have been very different, because I will confess that I wasted at least an hour trying to see if I could tell the entire story to the tune of Convoy. And then I decided, you know what, let's just tell the story and call it a day.
You know, I admire the commitment to parody, because I do love a good parody. I appreciate the effort that went into that. But yeah, I went, when you mentioned that before we started recording, I went to go listen to a little bit of the song. I was like, oh, okay, all right. I could see this.
We do have folks in our Gene-ology After Dark group on Discord.
Mm-hmm.
You know who you are, Alan. You could probably do this justice better than I can, so I will simply put that out into the universe.
Yeah, I was scrolling through my Spotify playlist, and I ran across one I had started a while back called Gene-ology's Greatest Hits. I was like, what? What did I do? And it was all songs that Alan had written Gene-ology parodies about. So I was like, oh yes, things I need to learn. So I am very sorry that we do not have video of this. I would really have loved to have seen this episode with my eyes versus just reading the script.
And not just because DeForest Kelley is the bad guy here, which he played the bad guy in many a Western. I mean, that was kind of what he was typecast as before he was typecast as Dr. McCoy.
Right.
As much as I don't want any of our episodes of anything that we cover to be lost media, oh yeah, I would trade in the video of Embezzler's Daughter for this one in a cold second. It's just a more exciting and intense story.
Yeah, this was really exciting. You and I were both burning the midnight oil last night, and I'm reading this script and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like much more interesting than Embezzler's Daughter. This was a real treat to read, and we're going to get into it in discussion, but there are so many things in here. I was like, oh, that made it to Star Trek. That did too. Oh, wait, we've got this. And oh, let's, as you already mentioned, we've got two actors who would later show up in Star Trek, one a regular, one a guest, but still, good grief. It's a lot of people.
I have so much more about that to say, because I think we are developing a good idea of what Gene's wheelhouse is, where he's doing his best work.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into that later. But first, I want to talk about Gene's description of Carlisle in the stage directions. This really brought me up short. Late 20s, he has the kind of quick, intelligent face we find in many of the new crop of electronic engineers who are revolutionizing the world today. And then he goes on to write, pleasant looking until you notice the eyes and expression, the sardonic look of a man who has decided he is an exceptional one, not bound by any rules. And reading that, suddenly I'm thinking less in terms of D. Kelly in 1961 and more in terms of the executive ranks of half of Silicon Valley and most of the social media ecosystem in 2025.
Yeah. As soon as I got to that last line in the description, I'm like, yeah, I can't stand this guy.
I will also point out Gene capitalized the first letters of exceptional one. I don't know who Gene had in mind, but he had something very specific in mind here.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe exceptional one in modern parlance might be dude bro.
Yep.
Dude bro, or men who call themselves alphas.
Yeah.
Fun fact, if you have to call yourself alpha, you're not an alpha.
I think I've gone on rants before about men who think that putting Greek letters in front of the word male actually means something.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that Shannon's got an insurance policy for being hit by a meteorite. It's like, dude, what are you, Captain Kirk's ex-girlfriend?
Right.
It's like all sorts of awful things happen to those ladies. It's like, oh
no.
Okay. Give or take a couple of stops. The entirety of Act 2 happens in a truck at night.
Hey, that's some inexpensive set design right there.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, does Gene know how to keep the set construction costs down or what?
Right.
Like, this is how you keep getting work doing stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
I had to go back and reread the stage directions for the scene where Shannon writes something with his finger in the dirt on the driver's side door of the truck. Cool idea. I start thinking about that in terms of my own hand-eye coordination. Or actually not just hand coordination because I cannot see it. It's like, if that were me instead of Shannon, it would be completely illegible.
Yeah.
He's trying to write the word inside. It's like, oh crap. Did I just do an N or a Z? I mean, if that was me driving that truck, you'd have a shot of Cochran backing up, squinting at the door, and then asking something like, plankton? or some other random word. Right. Because how do you even do that?
Right.
Maybe that's a me problem and not a Shannon problem.
I mean, some people on this planet are gifted with legible handwriting. I am not one of those people.
Yeah, but being able to do it when you can't even see what you're doing and, at some kind of funky angle, that's...
Funky angle in the dark.
Funky angle in the dark, which is my next techno cover band.
Okay. I was going to... Funky angle in the dark, in the dust on your truck.
Yes.
Dust on your truck is my new pop electronic country band.
Okay. Well, we know what we're doing after this show. Despite the fact that Carlisle is waving a gun around, this episode is almost all talk.
Yeah.
Because when you boil it down, it is a lively but very tense exchange of philosophical ideas. It's one set of values challenging another set of values, each value system championed by one character in the scene. I don't want to spoil anything. Everyone, please put a pin in this concept because we might see something like this again, maybe when we reach the very last episode of The Lieutenant. But what's really interesting in this script is you have a third party. You have Marie. And just by being there, whether she wants to or not, she is literally a life or death swing vote. Because at this point, the guys know they're not going to change each other's minds. They are trying to change hers. And everything hangs on it. And so, again, I see a pattern here of these scripts that Gene writes that really build the tension just verbally. So in the tradition of The Posse and Episode in Laredo and A Time for Hanging and The Lesson that we just covered on Two Faces West not too long ago, it's all talk, but Gene has a gift for convincing you that at any second, it's not going to continue being a conversation for long.
Right.
And Gene seems to have a really special gift for writing dialogue that makes that believable.
Yeah. This was a really tense read. It's interesting that you describe Marie as like a swing vote. Been rewatching Brooklyn Nine-Nine just to have something fun on in the background. And there's a season 6 episode called Casecation. Amy insists that she and Jake have a structured debate about whether or not to have kids. And so it's played for laughs, but then like structured debate comes up later in the episode and it's literally in a life or death situation. Like Jake is trying to stall someone from setting off a bomb. It's kind of a silly scenario. And yet like, hey, this is literally what's happening inside the cab of this truck. We've got the, unfeeling, emotionalist, cold logic, cold equations sort of perspective versus can we have compassion? What are morals and ethics? It's really fascinating. After that first episode that we got to watch of Shannon, I was not expecting anything as good as this in this script.
Here's the thing. I've watched a little more Shannon, which obviously was not Gene's work. And it's okay. I feel like this would probably be, if we were able to see it, if people with IMDb accounts were able to see it, this would be the top-ranked episode by miles. It is an exceptional one.
Yeah.
Now, I am very glad when Cochran does a Yui and calls for police backup, he mentions that the small-town cop smelled something fishy enough in that traffic stop that he flagged it. saying something's up with the guys in this truck. I am so glad that line is there, because otherwise the read on the cop looking at the two guys and saying, oh yeah, this lady made us late, wink, wink.
Mm-hmm.
And then just taking 240s and saying, well, you boys have fun. That's just unimaginably sleazy.
Yeah, no, it's one thing, like, to take a bribe to get out of a ticket. It's another thing where, human
trafficking is okay.
Yeah, we're winking at, like, oh, this traffic stop is literally involving human trafficking. Wink, wink. It's okay. Here's a few 20s. Go have fun.
Yeah. So I'm glad that in dialogue, moments later, we're like, no, the policeman was a good guy. He was on top of it. He was observant. He noticed something was amiss. At the end, when Shannon and Marie leave Cochrane to drive the truck home, I know it is 16 years too early for this song, but the moment they start walking towards Shannon's car, I want Jerry Reed's Eastbound and Down to start playing and to just keep running over the end credits.
You know what? I take it. I'll take it.
And somewhere in the distance, we can hear Dom DeLuise laughing.
It's funny. My grandfather worked for some time as a long haul trucker. And it was in, like, the height of, like, trucking was a cool thing in, like, the late 70s, early 80s. BJ and the Bear, that sort of thing. But I think about him whenever we run across stories like this that are, road stories involving trucking. And I wish I could have heard more of his trucking stories, because whenever we would go on, like, road trips and stuff on vacation, like, we would have a CB radio and we'd talk back and forth. And so I'm really inclined to really enjoy this kind of story, but I've never encountered one like this where it was like, also murder might happen along with stealing a felony's amount of stuff.
My family was also very involved in that business, but more on the management and brokerage end of it. But I would get dragged to work, especially with my mom. And so I spent a fair amount of time, around drivers and getting to know the lingo, kind of absorbing the laws and regulations. One thing that really stuck out to me in this story is Shannon's been driving all day. He's just gonna pound down a gigantic pot of coffee and keep driving. Oh, no. That's super illegal.
Yeah.
But it may not have been in 1961. But stuff like turning off the load lights, I knew, the script did not have to explain to me. I knew exactly what that meant.
Right. Like,
and so
that's going to get you pulled over.
Yeah, that will get you pulled over, because those mark out the shape of the trailer for other traffic so they can avoid you. You turn off the load lights, that is a big violation. And so I wonder where Gene got the info for this, because it's like, boy, somebody knows the industry pretty well.
I mean, I know he was a man that wore many hats, but I don't think one of those was long haul trucker.
Yeah, I do not believe so either. I have seen nothing in his biography that would indicate any connection with that industry. So it's kind of fascinating that evidently he put in some research and got this right.
Yeah.
There are so many moving pieces in this story, just plot-wise. But there are also some really interesting themes happening here. And I believe you and I may have picked up on the same things. First off, I want to ask you a question. I wonder, see if you can work this into your headcanon. Maybe Carlisle, could he have been some disaffected guy who spent a lot of time in a little town called Carbon Creek?
He easily could have been.
Because I don't see any pointed ears on you, boy, but you sound like a Vulcan.
Exactly. Yes, this is like Vulcan philosophy to an extreme.
this is Vulcan philosophy as a scary thing. And going back to Enterprise, because I just name-checked Carbon Creek, we do kind of get this in season 4 of Enterprise, if you think about it, with the Vulcans who are taking, sort of an isolationist, protectionist attitude because that's what their logic dictates.
Right.
Because, of course, we have hours of mission log chronicling Vulcans using logic to justify any number of things that really actual logic wouldn't. Now, it's important to point out, Gene has been playing with this emotionless, stoic character type for a long time. Yeah, oddly enough, going all the way back to The Secret Weapon of 117, which was the first sci-fi script that he sold, in which those emotionless people were actually from another planet. Now, Carlisle also reminds me a little bit of Mr. Deed, the criminal boss who is sure he is 10 steps ahead of Mr. District Attorney.
Mm-hmm.
Put those two together, and what do you get? You get the scariest thing we have seen until the last time Spock smiled, or until the next time Spock smiles, because Spock doesn't exist yet. This is 1961.
Right.
What's going on here?
Right. This is a Vulcan prototype, is what I see here.
Yeah. Star Trek has not even happened yet, and we have a Gene Roddenberry script with a character who professes to have shed his emotions in favor of pure logic.
Yeah.
Ironically, this character is played by DeForest Kelley, who would make a whole career out of going after someone else for being coldly logical and emotionless.
Right. They Kirk, Spock, and Bones are often cited as like a type of the soul triptych, which is a thing in literature, interpreting literature. McCoy, he's always the body of that. He's feeling all the things. He's very mercurial. And then Spock is the head. He's the mind. He's the logic. Kirk is the heart. But I think it's so weird to imagine this is DeForest Kelley as a dude bro.
Yeah.
Pretending to be Spock. Spock gone real bad.
Yeah. In a truck in 1961.
What a mental image, my friends.
Yeah, and I have a further reach for you. This character claims he underwent some kind of epiphany that drove him to embrace logic over emotion and compassion. So we're kind of inventing Kolinar here, too.
Yes, that's exactly it. I'm like, okay. Yeah, we're going there. It's Kolinar right there.
The downside to all this is that Shannon is suddenly the least interesting character in the show with his name on it.
I know. Man, poor Shannon. Not getting his due.
Yeah.
No respect.
I know a lot of folks tune into Gene-ology listening for anything that might be a sign of things to come. Well, everybody, here you go. Here's a bunch of it all at once. Here's what's really interesting. When it came to casting Spock for the original Star Trek, Gene did briefly offer the role to DeForest Kelley, who turned it down because he did not want to wear the ears. He did not want to be emotionless all the time. I can't help but speculate that happened because even though we can't see it, all we can do is read the script. DeForest must have made one hell of an impression as Carlisle to inspire Gene to reuse the character in a far more benign form, and enough to inspire Gene to bring DeForest Kelley on board the Enterprise in some role.
Right.
Even if it wasn't Spock.
I had forgotten that bit of information that DeForest was originally offered the role of Spock.
Yeah.
That's fascinating, especially now, knowing what I know now after reading this script.
Yes.
That's incredible.
I think that right there is a huge tell that he was amazing in this episode.
Yeah. Would agree. And even just from reading the script, you can hear it in his voice. Like, you can imagine, how would DeForest deliver this? Okay. All right. Let's roll with this. I think that'll be great.
Yeah, probably with clipped precision. When we read the Boots and Saddle script that we know DeForest Kelley was the main guest star in, that script felt like whatever his character was, he had that big Southern gentleman, hey, Jimmy boy, had that energy going on.
Yeah.
We saw him in 333 Montgomery, and I feel like that's probably closer to what he did here, except here he's dangerous. And
right.
That's the part I almost can't imagine, except watch a bunch of old Westerns. DeForest Kelley was often cast as the bad guy, because he's got a face whose neutral gear is kind of grumpy.
A little bit of RBF going on. Maybe
Resting
not entirely,
Bones face.
Resting Bones face.
Yes, that is, of course, what we meant when we said RBF.
Yes, he's got some Resting Bones face. Indeed. Man, gosh, I really wish you could see this, Earl.
Anyone out there who has this, I'll trade you my personal DVD-R copy of Embezzler's Daughter, if it seals the deal. Seriously.
Right. Yeah, come on. Can we talk about Marie just a little bit?
I think we should.
So, if you'll forgive my ignorance, but am I right to infer that the line "I'm a pickup" means that she is a lady of the night?
That is one very likely interpretation.
Okay.
And the script also says in the stage directions that she looks like someone who's lived hard.
Yeah, right.
It's very specific about that, and I'm very impressed that despite that, she is a sympathetic character.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me happy. It's far too easy to stereotype such a person into being less than sign, and on the other side of the less than side, every other character in the piece. Right.
If someone is described to have lived hard, they're not usually a sympathetic character.
Yeah.
They're usually an antagonist or somebody who's adversarial or there to stir the pot,
Yeah, I found Marie a fascinating character because not only does she become the swing vote, but the script is going out of its way to not pass moral judgment on whatever it is she does.
Right.
And I found that very refreshing.
Yeah, and even the title of the script is the pickup. You could think of that as her, because she literally says, "I'm a pickup."
Yeah,
or
it's definitely,
or it's about the pickup truck that he's driving.
Well, yeah, no one's driving a pickup truck in this. I'm assuming this is the 18. Well, 18 wheels may be a later invention. This is at least a 10-wheeler for 1961.
This is a cargo truck. This is hauling cargo, not like your Chevy 4x4.
Yeah. So I think
maybe not that, but I still I think truck when I hear pickup.
Yeah, but I think she's definitely to pick up. But like I said, it's very refreshing to pick up on a lack of casting moral aspersions on her, because this is what she must do to survive. She probably didn't ask to be put in that situation.
No.
And by the end of it, in fact, she seems to be a person of, extraordinary moral character, because she's made the choice and she realizes she has to act or someone else will die. So often you will see characters with this occupation or job description, if you will, cast as, what's the phrase, a person of loose morals. She seems to have very sharply defined morals, and they don't include letting someone be murdered right in front of her.
Right.
It's really interesting that this comes from a former police officer.
You have to wonder, did Gene ever encounter something like this in his time as an officer?
Almost certainly. I haven't read anything indicating that he ever had to work Vice Squad or anything like that. But he almost certainly encountered, and many times in the past, going all the way back to Mental Patient and other episodes of Highway Patrol and Mr. District Attorney, you find character types that other writers would immediately typecast as, this is a person of lower class, this is a person of lower standing, this is a person not to be trusted. Gene will take people like that and turn them into people of actually rather extraordinary moral character.
Mm.
And I think that's because one thing he did gain as a police officer was an understanding that you're not always meeting people at their best, and that they frequently did not ask to be in the situations that they are now in.
Right.
Okay, Ashley, there's action, there's adventure, there's danger. Is there more to this than that? What did you find here as far as morals, meanings, and messages?
I think this is an interesting look at the dangers of vilifying emotion. I think there's a lot to say here about, we've got folks now who believe empathy is not a desirable quality to have. I think also it's interesting that Carlyle is saying, I discovered this while working on computers. Basically, kind of the summation of the story is, this is a man who understood computers, but not people. I think you could take this and run with a similar script today and have a conversation about AI and the dangers of inputting the information and letting the computer tell you what to do without thinking it through for yourself, or fact-checking the information to see is what is getting spit back out at you correct.
You really wouldn't have to change a whole lot, because 1961, Carlyle's working on a computer. Okay, he's working on Univac or something that takes up a whole room.
Right. I was imagining how big that computer was. I'm like, ooh.
As big as that truck,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah, and then some.
But the script doesn't get into the weeds with that. It just says, oh, I was working on a computer and I had this epiphany that I could be an even more awful human being than I am now.
Right.
Not a whole lot needs to be changed for this to read as current.
No.
Except, of course, that now everyone would have cell phones, which might derail some elements.
Yeah, as you do. But
GPS.
This idea that life works so much better when we take away the human factor, when we take away any emotion, and we only work with logic. I'm not trying to vilify logic, but I think there's a danger when we think of all emotion or feeling as something evil, or the antithesis of how we should relate and problem solve, because it's not.
Yeah, and usually when you run into someone like that, they've been hurt.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the old saw that hurt people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be interesting to find out what broke Carlyle, but it's not essential to this story, because what we have here is a man who's already made a choice, but now Shannon has to make a choice on how to deal with him. But really, it's down to the tie-breaking vote, which is Marie. She has to decide which of these guys she is going to side with, because there's very little chance of her remaining A, neutral, and B, alive at the same time.
Right. It's challenging because you want people to change and be better. Like, could Carlyle have learned? Could he have taken into consideration, what Shannon is saying about empathy and morals and versus using cold logic? And yet, when we get this descriptor of him, he is what is it? An exceptional one. He believes himself to be an exceptional one. Well, I mean, this is textbook narcissism. Yes. So we've got a villain who's a narcissist, and instead of dealing with emotions or his own self-loathing, which is what narcissists actually feel, So they have to make sure they appear better than what they actually believe about themselves. He's like, oh, I'm just approaching this with logic. And you're, obviously, if you disagree with me, you are illogical. It's a whole thing. And yet, there is an epidemic of this right now.
Yes.
And we see it every day in the news. I don't want this script to be that dang prescient. I mean, this is the second in these one-off scripts where, like, could you film this today? Yeah, probably.
Yes. Yeah.
Wouldn't have to change very much, if anything at all.
I am glad you found that, because I was so fixated on other things, I kind of missed the probable narcissistic aspect. I thought it was really interesting that this iteration of the emotionless, logical character, for someone who's emotionless, he's surprisingly angry.
Yeah, somehow that gets dismissed as that's not an emotion. Anger is definitely an emotion. Fun fact.
My first reading of the script, I was thinking, okay, really cool story, really cool characters, not much in the way of the 3 M's.
Mm-hmm.
Then I asked myself, what is there? Because this was 1961. You had Berlin split down the middle. You had the idea already firmly planted in the public consciousness, and I'm sure this includes Gene, that the world was now in the hands of men with their fingers on the nuclear buttons who have been trained to think like machines. That Cold War doctrine of mutually assured destruction that was supposedly going to keep World War III from breaking out, that only works if your men are thinking like machines, because if either one of them has enough of a heart and enough compassion that he has a moment of weakness and says, I can't do this, meaning either I can't launch the attack or I can't retaliate, because either one means killing an incalculable number of people, I can see where in 1961 the coldly logical killer is everybody's worst nightmare. Because that is a warning about the kind of person that could bring the world to an end. But what if Gene took this character devoted to logic, but also gave him compassion and curiosity, and not just a self-centered certainty that he's the smartest guy in the room? I think we know now this is an idea that will be forming in Gene's head sometime between now and March 1964. But, I think Shannon just drove past the sign that says, Star Trek, 3 years ahead. Because this definitely feels like we are on the road to that. Even if it's a modern-day kind of quasi-spy thriller, there's so much here that's going to turn up later.
Right.
It glows. You can't miss it.
Yeah.
Special thanks to the Roddenberry Repertory Players. Our cast this week featured James Herrera as Shannon and Quinn Elmer as Carlisle. Gene-ology is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it's also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on Facebook at missionlogpod. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Gene-ology. If you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com, and Mission Log Gene-ology is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment.
On the next Gene-ology, a deeper dive into Gene's collaborations with DeForest Kelley. Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Rand Hurl, Tom Kozak, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Schabel, Paul Shadwell, and David Takechi.
We'll be back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.